sense and clearly demonstrate a total lack of understanding of either the legislation or the understanding of its impact. And what we have before us is gotcha moments on the part of this governor. And we cannot govern by gotcha. We have to govern based upon policy. And with that, I will turn it over to our majority leader, Senator Saslaw.
Thank you, Senator Locke. I've been there. This is the 13th governor I've been under, and we've never had one like this before. And what his vetoes showed more than anything else was not so much an ideological problem, but one of pettiness and vindictiveness. And that's not the way you set up a good tone in government. It looks like he's never gotten out of the campaign mode. And you don't build relationships with the state legislature when you do things like this. Like I said, I've been there under 13 governors. We've never had any situation like this. We've never had a governor who signed one person's bill, and these are bills that are going through with no dissenting votes, and then vetoed somebody else's in the other chamber and saying, well, we don't need it because I signed the other bill. That's never been done before. And as I said, it's petty and vindictive. And his lack of experience and knowledge of Virginia government is beginning to show almost every day. This is not a government run by photo ops. You pumping gas, shooting baskets on a court, and shopping at a store to make your point is not how government is run. And this, don't get mad, get even mentality has got to stop. If we're going to have a successful government, we all need to get together. And, we've seen some of his cabinet people come over and give campaign speeches. He claims that we're taxed too heavily, when in fact, we're right in the middle, 24th, of states with taxes. Our business, 2 years running, best state to do business in. He's criticized that. He's criticized our public schools. Yet Forbes magazine, hardly a liberal publication, has for the second or third year in a row ranked us as the fourth best public school system in the country. He's got to get away from this vengefulness. He's got to get away from this retaliation mentality and start governing the state the way it should be governed. And if he does that, he'll find cooperation. If he wants to continue this war, we can do that too. The choice is his. Thank you, Senator Locke.
Thank you, Senator Saslaw. We will now turn it over to hear some remarks from some of our senators, beginning with Senator Evans.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Locke. I was stunned at the governor's unexplainable decision to veto meaningful, non-controversial legislation. These vetoes ranged from protecting living organ donors to enhancing consumers' data privacy to reforming the VEC, and are not in the best interest of Virginia. We're here to govern, and partisan infighting serves no one well. Voters want people to work together to solve problems. They want officials who will serve with competence, civility, and a spirit of cooperation for the greater good of Virginia. I hope the Republicans in the legislature will stand up for that spirit of civility, one that past Republican governors have believed in. And I hope they reject this partisan effort to turn Richmond into Washington. Democrats are here to govern, and we ask our Republican colleagues to join us. And I'm going to turn it over to Senator Creed Eads.
Thanks so much, Adam. It takes two sets of skills to do this work. One is sales. You've got to be elected. That's a political skill. But once you get elected, you've got to govern. And govern requires that you work together with whomever else is elected to try to do the right thing for the people that you represent. This governor has not figured out yet that governing requires that we all work together. The bill that he vetoed, my bill, simply provided an enforcement mechanism for a change in the law we made when Republicans had complete control of the General Assembly back in 2005 to protect victims of crime. Victims of crime should not be re-victimized by facing harassing medical bills when they've got claims before the victims' compensation fund. We made that policy decision 17 years ago. Unfortunately, there was no enforcement mechanism, and at least in one case, there was still harassment. The harassment caused material harm to one of the people that I represent. And that's what this bill is all about. On a bipartisan majority on both sides saw the wisdom of this legislation and passed it. Many people have asked me if we Democrats intend to override vetoes. Well, we're going to do the best we can, but we can't override vetoes because that takes a 2/3 majority. Republicans in the General Assembly have to figure out whether they're going to stand on their own 2 feet and try to help their governor understand the way government works. And now I'm turning it over to Scott Servell.
Thanks, Senator Deeds. I'm here to talk about my 2 bills that were shockingly vetoed. The first one was a bill that had to do with landfill fees, and it evolved out of legislation that was introduced back in 2021. And after that, the Department of Environmental Quality put together a group of landfill stakeholders and other some policymakers at DEQ. And they sat down, and this work group came together and worked for over a year to come up with an agreed set of fees that would fund all solid waste enforcement in Virginia, so that our solid waste enforcement efforts aren't competing against things like schools or healthcare, behavioral health, higher ed for funding. And all these people, dozens and dozens of people, put in a lot of work to reach a consensus, and the industry actually agreed that they wanted to increase their fees so they could have consistent enforcement. That bill went right through the legislature. Nobody objected. The industry stood up repeatedly and said they're okay. Administration had people in the room. Nobody said they had a problem. The bill passes both chambers, and then magically a veto appears. The way this process is supposed to work, if you have a problem with the bill, you bring it up during session so you can talk about it. Maybe you can make some adjustments, maybe you can make some changes, maybe you can find a consensus because we work together to try to reach good policy. And that's how we normally do things. And I understand, that the governor was still getting his feet on the ground, but we all know this was one of the slowest transitions we had ever seen. There's still dozens and dozens of positions that aren't filled. And if the governor wasn't, hiring everybody by using a headhunter, instead, if he was using experienced policy professionals in his administration, then perhaps we would have gotten the feedback we needed to reach good decisions during session. And that is his fault. It isn't our fault. The other bill that got vetoed didn't get a single no vote on the floor of either chamber. All it was a bill that said that when a prosecutor sends out a subpoena for a witness in a criminal case, they have to send a copy to the defense lawyer, like every other lawyer in Virginia in every other case. Not a single person objected. The Virginia Association of Commonwealth Attorneys said in committee they were totally fine with it. Nobody had a problem with it. Then magically, the governor comes up with 3 big problems with the bill that nobody raised during session. We would have been happy to talk about, and he vetoes it. In fact, I think it was 7 or 8, and even maybe 9 of these bills that were vetoed were passed unanimously by both chambers. From my perspective, it's like beating a baby seal. I mean, who does that? When things go through that are unanimous, usually everybody's okay with it. And so from my perspective, this governor, he might have a Harvard MBA, but he sure doesn't have a monopoly on good policy ideas on things that have been approved and voted on by 140 people who've been doing this a lot longer than he has. I would really hope that he would take this session as a learning experience, so we don't have to go through this again. So we don't waste everybody's time in working groups and on the floor vetting these bills when he's just going to veto them and not tell us about it until the last second. It's really not fair. And now I'm turning it over to I think Dave Marsden, Jacqueline, or
John Bell.
John Bell, Senator Bell.
Thanks, Scott. I'm going to talk about the bill I introduced this year, SB 347, which was a bill that was designed to provide energy efficiency measures and corrections for our most vulnerable citizens. Let me repeat that, our most vulnerable citizens. This is a pilot program that was going to expire in January 2029. And basically, Dominion Energy contacted me and I worked with them. They volunteered for the program. It only applied to their customers, very small group of people. And all the energy efficiency groups and environmental groups supported the bill. We had no opposition when it was presented. This bill was targeting low-income people, elderly people, disabled veterans. the people that couldn't be in a position to fix maybe a hole in the roof or a broken window in their home that caused them to use excessive amounts of energy. Now, oftentimes these customers are unable to pay the bill. So by fixing the problem, not only do we provide a better living environment for those people, we also are preventing a situation where someone will have a high bill they can't afford to pay. So I mention this because I think this was a good bill, and it was one that ultimately wasn't going to cost the taxpayers any money, and was going to be for the good of our most vulnerable citizens. No opposition to the bill. One of the things that I want to kind of echo the comments of my colleagues is I never heard from the governor or his team during the legislative session about any problems in the bill. And prior to the veto, I never heard anything that there was an issue with the bill. I have tried to, in my 7 years in the General Assembly, have a brand that shows I'll work with anybody for the good of my constituents and the good of the Commonwealth. And I'll talk and work with everyone. And it's very unfortunate that this was vetoed without even a conversation. And I hope that that will be something that is learned and we don't do that in the future. Because again, I'll work with anybody for the good of the people that I serve. And frankly, trying to do good for the most vulnerable citizens, I believe, is all of our charge. And frankly, those were the remarks of the governor at his inauguration. So I would ask that we please take a look at this and we don't operate without communicating with each other. That's not the Virginia way, and that's not the way that's good for the people we serve. With that, I'm now going to pass it over to Senator Dave Marsden for some remarks.
Thank you so much, Senator Bell. This is Senator Dave Marsden from Fairfax County. So now I want to present a slightly lighter side of Veto Gate here. I introduced Senate Bill 722, which was a bill to deal with a problem we were having in my district up here, which is cars parking with their wheels fully up on the curb, creating property damage and safety concerns. And the governor's arguments against the bill were based on the introduced bill and not the amendments that were made by both the House and the Senate as it went through the process. They just went back to the introduced bill to make their arguments for vetoing the measure, and which is really kind of strange, and it shows you the level of effort that went into this. The second bill I did was as chairman of the Transportation Committee. I was very concerned about the trucks jackknifing in the January 3rd snowstorm event on Interstate 95 and the resultant 28 hours, up to 28 hours that people were sort of held hostage on that highway. And I introduced a bill that said trucks ought to stay in the right line when lane when frozen precipitation is coming down. And the trucking industry came to me and said, Dave, that might create a bigger problem of blocking cars from exiting the interstate or entering the interstate. What the problem might really be is trucks using compression brakes and using cruise control during these events. And so I thank the truckers, and that's what we turned the bill into, because they're very knowledgeable. And the governor's argument was based on the fact that he was defending the truckers and not trying to burden them when they were the ones that gave me the language for the bill. So very little effort went into these arguments against the bills. And this is almost comically incompetent. You just can't make this stuff up. And with that, I'll turn it over to Senator Barbara Favola. Barbara?
Thank you, Senator Marsden. And I will echo some of the thoughts that my colleagues have shared with you all. This has been a very interesting, it's my 11th session in the General Assembly. And observing the workings of the governor's office has been a very interesting and perplexing experience. When you remind yourself that the bills that land on the governor's desk have passed the House and the Senate with bipartisan support, and oftentimes with significant bipartisan support. Lawmakers, when we come to Richmond, for the most part, are very intent on solving a problem. We hear from our constituents. We are aware of issues with certain agencies or gaps in laws that have caused our constituents pain and suffering, if you will. And we really are intent on helping the people who elected us. So with that backdrop, you would want to believe that the governor, who represents the same constituents we represent on a statewide basis, would also want to solve the problem that our legislation is intended to address. And if in fact that pragmatic, common sense attitude was prevalent throughout this administration, I think we would be able to come to more resolutions, and we would be able to actually affect change that would be positive for our constituents. So it's very perplexing. I don't know if there's significant philosophical differences between Governor Youngkin and the Republican majority in the House, or if there are more management issues where the governor simply does not have an experienced team, does not understand the legislative process, doesn't understand that we really do have to work together to get to a positive result. I will say he has signed several of my bills that were related to healthcare and access to healthcare, which I am grateful for. The one bill that really sort of gives me great anxiety was a bill I had introduced in the Senate. It passed in the Senate, did not pass in the House, but Delegate Hope's bill passed the House and Senate, and that had to do with allowing Arlington County to exercise the same authority that other counties could exercise when it came to establishing the Citizen Oversight Board. Arlington County wanted to be able to have their elected body hire an auditor to assist the civilian oversight body. And that simple change, which again would have put Arlington on the same playing field as every other county, was rejected by the governor, even though the bill passed the House with 65 Republican votes, passed the Senate, but it was defeated. So that's one bill that I wish we had had an opportunity to sit down with Governor Youngkin to really talk about what we were trying to do. So having said that, I guess I'm the last person on the talk sheet here, and I will conclude and turn it back to our moderator. Senator Locke, are you moderating questions?